All right, so my name is Robert Hanna, and I'm here on behalf of the Lewis and Clark Fort Mandan Foundation. How many of you are from, North Dakota? Okay, just checking, because I figured everybody would be, but then I talked to Jane here and found out that I wasn't. Where are you from?
Well, I live here now. I've been here for a little over 2 years, but I'm originally from Montana and northern Wisconsin.
Montana and northern Wisconsin, okay. Well, you can put your hand up too, that counts.
Okay.
2 years, yeah.
Good, oh, great.
So, let's see. Yeah, so we're located up in Washburn, and we do a lot of Lewis and Clark history. That's kind of what we're best known for. We have Fort Mandan, the little triangular fort where Lewis and Clark briefly lived in 1804 and 5, reconstructed. But in recent years, we've tried to get more into the agricultural history of North Dakota because farming is basically the main thing that's happened in this state for a really, really long time. And there's not enough places talking about that history. You know, I don't know, maybe we think farming is kind of boring, but it seems that every time we go to the grocery store, we appreciate the good work that farmers are doing. And so we want to bring more attention to that. Hi. So today, I want to kind of introduce some of the heirloom seeds that we have in North Dakota. I tried to look this up the other day just to make sure I knew what I was talking about. It looks like we've been farming in North Dakota for about 500 years. And you can't do that for that long without having developed some unique varieties of different crops. You know, heirloom seeds. Is everybody familiar with heirloom seeds? Yeah, we have a fantastic heritage of these. Oftentimes very rare, sometimes frankly kind of endangered crop varieties. You know, you think of wine grapes, for example, right? Like you have the Merlot grapes and the Chardonnay grapes, and they're all subtly different, kind of unique, and people get really excited about the different flavors. Well, you have a lot of those same unique things going on with the heirloom crops that are here in North Dakota. So one of the projects that we're working on at the Lewis and Clark Fort Mandan Foundation is trying to preserve those North Dakota heirloom varieties and get people growing them again. So in the course of this, you'll get introduced to some interesting and super rare seed varieties that we have up here. So at the end, you want to come up and look at them again too, or some of them I'll pass around too. But that's kind of the gist of what this is about. This is called the Oscar H. Will and Company, after one of the first businesses that was ever set up in Bismarck back in the 1880s. A guy by the name of Oscar Will, I have a portrait of him right here, came from upstate New York and moved to what was then this brand new town of Bismarck, just a couple of years after Custer left and never came back, early 1880s. And he started working for this seed company that was located kitty corner to the public library. I suppose most of you know where that is, right? The public library down here. Yeah, kitty corner to that, there's kind of a parking lot, and then this one house, which is I can't remember, a massage place or something like that. Sorry? Yoga studio, okay. Basically, where that house stands was the Oscar Will Seed Company. He started selling seeds to the early farmers in North Dakota. Something that people, really needed. But he was one of these guys who just doesn't quite think the way everybody else does, right? In early North Dakota, people grew hard-bred spring wheat, and that's it. And that's kind of a problem, because if the price for wheat is really bad one year, or the weather doesn't really help you grow wheat very well that year, as a farmer, that could be enough to put you out of business. This is before a lot of the crop insurance and other things that we have available now. So Oscar Will, in a way that I think is pretty remarkable for his time period, thought about the fact that the Hadassah tribe and the Mandan tribe in North Dakota had been farming around here, as I've been saying, starting at least 500 years ago. And he realized that, these were crops that would already have the potential to thrive in this area. And so by appreciating that talent and essentially he would try to acquire some of these different kinds of seeds. Sometimes he got them from other, white people, essentially, and sometimes they were actually given to him as gifts by Hadassah and Mandan people. So we'll talk about that too. But with that kind of attitude of respect and that unique perspective for his time period, the 1880s, he ended up creating this company that lasted into about the 1950s that gives us this legacy that I think makes Bismarck a different place from what it otherwise would have been, and has changed our lives and made it better to this day. And the benefits that Oscar Will and his seed company gave us maybe you haven't heard of them before, but you will know what they are by the time we're done today. And I think there are three main things. There's the actual seeds that we still have and that are sitting on this table. There's artwork, more on that later. And there's information, just knowledge that we have about our own heritage and history here in North Dakota. So let me start with the seeds, right? The Hidatsas and the Mandans were not the only tribes that farmed in North Dakota, but they're kind of the most famous. They would live along the Missouri River. They would thrive off of farming. To give you an idea, Ben Franklin, when he was a kid, he moved to New York City to learn printing from his brother in 1723. And New York City had probably about 7,000 or 8,000 people, they figure. If you were to go over to Bismarck that same year, there was at least that many people, and some people think twice as many, just in the Mandan tribe. Then if you went right up the river to the Hidatsa tribe, it was probably again as many people. Like this piece of river was one of the most populated places in North America at that time. And these folks were just thriving off of growing fantastic crops. So I will pass some of them around. Here's in Mandan, now we'll say it's Seshka. This is Mandan red flour corn. Mandans had, depending on the time period and stuff, roughly 13 different corn varieties. And most of those had distinct flavors. People used to say, if you gave me some of this corn, like actual Mandans, if you gave me this corn in a dark room to try, I could tell you which one it was by the flavor. They're all unique. There was also a lot of beans. Like here are Hidatsa white beans. Hidatsa red beans. Here's Hidatsa shield beans. Let's just start them in the same direction to avoid confusion. What else have we got up here? Arikara yellow beans, a tribe that kind of originated in South Dakota and generally is based out of North Dakota now. So, and there's a whole bunch of more things, right? About half dozen Hidatsa bean varieties, half dozen Mandan bean varieties. I'm sure similar things in the Arikara tribe. 9 corn varieties in the Hidatsas. You get the idea, right? There were also sunflowers. There was also squash. Eventually watermelon, although that's originally from Africa. But when tribes in North Dakota got watermelon, probably in like the 1800s, they started breeding that too and making their own watermelon varieties. And this stuff is fantastic. If you get to see the corn, it grows probably like about this tall, which seems kind of sad, but when you think about like the most modern wheat varieties you can get, it's also really short. Because why should you waste your nutrients trying to grow that stalk, right? What you wanted was the good ears. And the ears were good, like for that time period, they were nice. Big, long ears, probably about 8 rows of corn. I don't know how much you're into plants, but it was good corn, and it was well suited to the kind of climate that we have in this part of North Dakota. So that's what Oscar Will really appreciated. And he wasn't the only person to appreciate that either. For instance, the Falconer family, they homesteaded in the area, let's see, kind of where like Apple Creek comes down? I asked how many of you are from North Dakota, how many are like actually from Bismarck?
Not from here, but we reside here.
Okay, so where Apple Creek kind of comes down, like if you're on your way to the University of Mary, basically like midway between the airport and University of Mary, that was the Falconer farm. And they got here very early on, and they needed something to feed to cattle and feed to the pigs and whatnot. And so they acquired from, I think, a missionary family that lived on the reservation with the Hidatsas, Mandans, and Arikaras, some of the corn that they had. And so he kind of crossbred a couple of varieties and started growing this corn, right? This like early on. He was one of the very, very first farmers in North Dakota. But, the Falconers figured out you can't just grow corn that does fine in, Iowa or Illinois or something in North Dakota. It just can't be done. The season is too short, the weather's too cold, the weather's too harsh. So he needed extra hardy, determined to grow stuff like that. And so that's what Oscar Will came to appreciate. So Oscar Will started selling the Falconers Corn. He got that from the Falconer family. This is one that he bred himself from a couple of different Indian varieties from North Dakota. That's called Gehu Flint.
Did Oscar actually have plots of fields that he cultivated himself, or did he incorporate other farmers to breed?
Both.
Both?
Both, yeah. You know where kind of Barnes & Noble and Target and stuff are right now?
Mhm.
That was actually Oscar Will's area where he would grow these originally develop them. But then, yeah, he'd also contract out to other farmers in different parts of the state because he didn't have enough land down there to do all that. Pride of Dakota White Flint. I think this is the first variety that he bred himself. But essentially, it's Mandan White Flint corn, and he hardly changed a thing. Fun fact about Mandan White Flint, this was the original popcorn from North Dakota. This probably right here. Well, this was given to us by the Agricultural Research Service of the USDA, and I'd get in serious trouble if I used this popcorn. Put it in the machine, that is what it would do. There you go. So Oscar Will started developing, I think, something of a reputation for appreciating and respecting these different plants. And so a Hidatsa guy by the name of Son of a Star went to his shop one day with a little leather bag full of one of the beans that we've already seen. Jonathan, do you have that? Is that the one?
Which one?
It's called Hidatsa Shield beans. It's white and brown. Oh, there you go. Those right there. Beautiful beans. And Son of a Star came to the shop and told Oscar Will, hey, I think this is something that you would appreciate. I'd like to have this as a gift. And that gift essentially became a gift to all of us alive today. I promise you, you have already eaten that kind of bean. Now, at that time, I don't know why, this would have been in also the mid-1880s, there's this weird obsession with food being white colored. Like sweet corn was white back then, everything needed to be white. It seemed pure and clean to people, so maybe that's why. But he kind of rebred it to make them this color. And I think he wanted them to be a little bit more of a bush bean. That one, it kind of grows bush style-ish, but also kind of vines, and he wanted something that, could be grown in big old fields. So he produced these great northern beans after several years and introduced them in like the late 1880s. So I'll pass those around, but frankly, I didn't have to get those from the USDA because Great Northern Beans became this massive, massive hit, which are now one of the most common white beans eaten in the world. And to this day in North Dakota, thousands, if not tens of thousands of acres are planted in these Hidatsa beans. And that's why we can safely say in North Dakota that our farming tradition that we're still doing now is at least 500 years old. We're planting the same stuff to this day, and it's thanks to Oscar Will. So, if you're trying to choose a white bean, there you go. That's not a bad one to choose. Okay, so now the artwork. It wasn't just that Oscar Will appreciated these actual crops. It was that he gave credit, to the folks who were responsible for it. We know that story about these beans because he chose to talk about it in his catalog. He told that story in almost every issue about how Son of a Star had given him those beans originally. The other thing that he would do is acknowledge the Hidatsa and Mandan and other American Indian sources in his catalogs. So here's a couple of different catalog covers that he had produced over the years. Okay, so this is going to be a story about kind of a father-son duo. Oscar Will started the company, and then his son George Will took the company over. You may be familiar with George Will, I think, who's a famous political commentator. He's actually like their great-grandson. I think George Will's great-grandson. Anyway, so this is the 1917 catalog cover. This was from the year that Oscar Will died. And they wanted to honor him as the founder of the company. And then right next to him, you have a picture where the caption says, Dakota's first seed specialist. And this is a lady named She Scatters Corn, a Mandan Indian farmer, that, they're acknowledging for, having the original talent. And at that time, in 1917, she would have been like one of the last real experts who knew from firsthand experience the traditional farming techniques. More on that later as well. And so anyway, he would have these pretty slick catalog covers done. This one just kind of has a cool background, shows some of the different corn stalks and whatnot. Here, let's see, this is 1925, kind of Hollywood style depiction right here. Not exactly a lot of historical content to it, but it's a nice picture. This is very Hollywood. I don't know what else to say. But here's the thing. Over the years, he has, and this is now George Will, he asked his friend Clell Gannon to help him out. Clell is a young man from Bismarck who works for the Provident Life Insurance Company. You know, the building downtown with the weird weather beacon on the top, right, that everybody looks at. He used to do art for them. And once a year, he'd have Clell do a painting for the catalog. So they kind of got rid of whoever these slick studio artists were, who I bet you anything lived in Minneapolis or something, and had Clell do it. And Clell really appreciated and understood these traditional cultures. He and George, as well as the guy who founded the Boy Scouts in America, I don't recall his name, but they used to go...
Thompson Seton.
Thank you. They used to go on trips together, and they'd go to different historic sites in North Dakota, you know, probably before most of them were even officially historic sites. So Clell knew what he was doing. And if you were to go to, let's say, Honest Land Village, south of Mandan today, you'd still see these same kind of baskets. You know, the corn varieties that he shows are probably accurate as well. And he's depicting some of the different ceremonies that go into this corn. So George Will wanted the good folks of North Dakota and Montana and so forth that were his customers to understand what the history was behind the crops that they were still planting. This shows a watcher's scaffold, right? If you garden just about anywhere in North Dakota except maybe in town, you're going to have to think about deer. So Hidatsas and Mandans would sit on these scaffolds and frighten away any deer that would try to come and steal the corn. So he's depicting that right here. Here's women hoeing. In case I forgot to point this out, the farmers in Hidatsa and Mandan culture were the women. The men just got to eat all the good things. The women were the ones, they were the ones breeding these crops and raising them and so forth. You see the earth lodges in the background, which I imagine you've probably seen at some point in North Dakota here. Right? So that's the idea. And so for years, these are the kinds of covers that he would make. Here's Lewis and Clark receiving corn, because Hidatsas and Mandans gave corn to Lewis and Clark, and they brought it back to Thomas Jefferson, who we believe planted it at Monticello.
Which of these is when Clell Gannon started doing this is the first
36.
I don't know what the exact first year was. I know that's not Clell right there. So of the ones that we have,
So this is the first one.
yeah, that might be the first Clell one. And he's not quite, you know, as polished of an artist, I suppose, but the research there is fantastic. And then George, you get the impression that George really wanted to kind of embed this knowledge of our history throughout the community. So, being kind of a civic-minded guy, when the courthouse was being built, he saw if he could try to get Clell to do murals for the courthouse. So, you know, the old, it's the kind of Art Deco building down here. Try to go in there sometime. I know they have kind of this intimidating looking security thing you have to go through, you know, so leave your guns and knives behind. But go through there and check out the courthouse, because you have all kinds of murals all over the place depicting the history of Bismarck, or North Dakota in general. Well, Burleigh County, I guess, is the idea. And especially highlighting the Mandans, who are kind of the original settlers of this area. So, back to the artwork. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about was the knowledge that's been handed down to us. Let's say you wanted to know about American Indian farming or something, and you live in Illinois, Oklahoma, Montana, something like that. You know, tribes farmed all over the country. Well, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to learn about American Indian farming in North Dakota, because we're just really lucky here to have fantastically preserved information about it, where other parts of the country that a lot of that knowledge just didn't end up getting preserved. I've seen museum stores in, I can't remember, Nebraska or something, selling Buffalo Birdwoman's Garden, which is about how to farm, you know, in the area around Stanton, North Dakota, because that's the information that's been handed down to us. But George Will was one of the leading people doing that. George Will and an acquaintance of his, George Hyde, wrote this book back in 1917, back when information about this traditional agriculture was still available, because you could talk to She Scatters Corn and so forth. And so they compiled this fantastic book about corn from throughout really North Dakota, Montana, down into South Dakota, and perhaps Nebraska as well. So he published this in 1917. What else did he do to preserve this knowledge? He did the first archaeological dig ever done in North Dakota. You know, this was before King Tut's tomb was discovered. He did an archaeological dig in, I think, about 1906 at Double Ditch Village while he was a student at Harvard, actually. George Will went to Harvard University in the very early 1900s. And so he came back with a friend of his, Jose Spinton, I believe was his name. And they did an archaeological dig up at Double Ditch Village to try to, you know, learn more about the traditional culture of that area. In fact, a lot of people, well, because the Oscar Will Seed Company doesn't exist anymore, right? They went out of business in, I want to say 1955. And a lot of people think it was because George Will was not really that great as a businessman. Like Oscar Will, pretty good at that. But George, he was so into this history and culture aspect that he was doing things, you know, like he would sell collections of these American Indian seeds with booklets of information about the history of these plants and stuff like that, which is fantastic. But meanwhile, everybody else is starting to produce hybrid seeds and distribute them on a national basis, and you know, the whole kind of local, you know, think about the food from your own area was not really a big thing in the 1950s, and so he starts really kind of losing business. He's not making the changes that he probably needed to make in order to earn a lot of money. But he did contribute those three things that we've been talking about, right? Passing down those seeds themselves, especially the beans, the artwork that we've been talking about, and the knowledge, you know,